Once, there was a marriage that seemed almost perfect, the kind that neighbors whispered about with admiration. A husband who walked tall with ambition in his eyes, and a wife who glowed with kindness, carrying within her the promise of new life. Together, they painted an image of happiness so pure that no one could imagine how quickly it would turn into a nightmare. Behind the walls of their beautiful home, a storm was already brewing, a storm that neither love nor loyalty could stop. The husband was a man admired by many. Charming, clever, and ambitious, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him greatness. His smile could light up a room, his words could persuade anyone, but hidden behind that charm was a restless hunger. He wanted more than love, more than family, more than the life he had promised to his wife. That hunger led him down a path he could never return from. The wife, on the other hand, was gentle in every way. She trusted too easily, loved too deeply, and believed in the goodness of people, especially in the man she had chosen to build a life with. Carrying his child, she dreamed only of peace, of family dinners, of tiny footsteps echoing through their halls. She saw her future in his arms, blind to the shadows that lingered over him. Those shadows had a name. A forbidden lover, mysterious and intoxicating, entered his life with whispers of passion and temptation. But it wasn't only the affair that consumed him, it was a painting, born from her hands, that twisted his mind. Love, lust, greed, and obsession collided, setting the stage for betrayal so cruel that even he could not imagine the regret it would leave behind. Their marriage had started like a dream, the kind that people speak about with admiration and envy. Friends and relatives remembered the wedding day as a fairy tale, her in a flowing white gown, radiant and shy, and him standing tall with eyes that promised forever. Every picture captured their smiles, the way his hand rested protectively on hers, and the warmth that seemed to surround them. It was the kind of union everyone believed would stand unshaken by time. The early years only strengthened that belief. They laughed freely, traveled to places they had once spoken about when they were still only dreaming, and filled albums with photographs that captured their joy. Neighbors saw them as inseparable, two people who lived in their own world of devotion. He worked hard, always chasing bigger opportunities, and she cared for their home with a heart so full of love it spilled into every corner. Together, they seemed unstoppable, their life a blend of ambition and tenderness. When she discovered she was pregnant, the news spread joy like wildfire. She glowed with happiness, her smile brighter than ever, her steps lighter as if she was walking on clouds. He too appeared excited, boasting to colleagues about becoming a father, painting pictures of the future they were about to embrace. They decorated the nursery together, spoke about names, and planned holidays with their child. Those days were filled with hope and gentle laughter, and she believed more than ever that their love was eternal. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple, the ones others compared themselves to. Friends whispered that no storm could ever reach them, that they were proof true love existed. Yet, beneath the surface, tiny cracks had begun to show. He grew distracted, often restless, as if something was pulling him away from the world they had built. She noticed but brushed it aside, convincing herself that his ambition demanded his attention. She trusted him too much to believe that the seeds of betrayal were already taking root. She entered his life like a whisper carried by the wind, unexpected yet impossible to ignore. The lover was unlike anyone he had ever known, mysterious, artistic, and dangerous in the way she carried herself. Her presence lingered even after she left a room, like the scent of perfume that clung to his memory. She was everything his wife was not because his wife lacked anything, but because the lover represented rebellion, desire, and a thrill that made him feel alive in a way ordinary love could not. At first, it was harmless. He admired her work, her bold personality, the way her eyes seemed to strip him of his secrets. They exchanged polite words, nothing more, but even in those moments, an invisible thread was being woven between them. What began as curiosity soon grew into secret conversations. She flattered him, telling him he was different, that he deserved more than the quiet domestic life he had built. He found himself craving her words like a drug. Their meetings became frequent. What he told his wife were late nights at work were stolen hours in hidden corners, where passion eclipsed reason. She knew how to feed his ego, how to make him believe that he was special, irreplaceable, destined for something greater. The more she drew him in, the more distant he became from his pregnant wife, who still trusted him with her whole heart. The lover was skilled at manipulation. She painted herself as the only one who truly understood him, who could match his hunger and ambition. Her laughter thrilled him, her touch set fire to his veins, and her whispers convinced him that his wife was holding him back. She was not simply a distraction, she became an addiction. His wife sensed the shift. She noticed his distracted eyes, his sudden coldness, the way he seemed to be in two places at once. She asked gentle questions, hoping to understand, but he brushed them off with charm and excuses. In her innocence, she trusted him, telling herself that it was just work, just stress, that soon he would return to her fully. She had no idea that another woman had already claimed his heart and was slowly poisoning his mind. It was not only her presence that bound him, but something she created, something that would soon control his every thought. The lover was an artist, and from her hands came a painting unlike any other he had ever seen. It was dark, sensual, and haunting, carrying with it a power he could not explain. The strokes of her brush seemed to capture passion and sin in colors so vivid that he found himself staring at it for hours, unable to look away. To him, it wasn't just paint on canvas, it was a symbol of what they shared, a secret world only the two of them understood. He became obsessed with it. He would visit her under the pretense of admiration, but it was the painting that drew him back again and again. He claimed it was art, but in truth, it was the way it made him feel, powerful, desired, unchained from responsibility. In its depths, he saw a reflection of himself he could not admit to anyone else. Every curve of the brush, every shadow, whispered to him about passion and freedom, things he believed his marriage had stripped away. The lover, aware of his fixation, began to use it against him. She teased him with the painting, sometimes covering it, sometimes revealing only glimpses, as though dangling temptation before a starving man. Her words became more dangerous with time. "If you truly love me, prove it." At first, it was playful, a taunt meant to excite him, but soon her demands turned darker. She began to paint not just with colors, but with suggestions, planting ideas in his mind that grew like weeds. The painting was no longer simply art, it was a weapon. It blurred the line between passion and madness, between desire and destruction. He began to resent his wife, believing she stood in the way of the life he truly deserved. The lover whispered that their love could never fully exist while his wife and unborn child were still there. And in his mind, the painting became more than a symbol. It became a challenge, a demand, a proof of loyalty he felt he had to meet. Blinded by obsession, he failed to see that the very thing he worshipped was leading him toward ruin. The colors on the canvas were no longer just pigment, they were poison, dripping into his heart, clouding his judgment, and pulling him toward an act that would shatter everything he once held dear. She prepared for the baby with a heart overflowing with joy. Every morning, she would stand in the nursery, her hand resting on her growing belly, whispering promises to the child who had not yet seen the world. The room slowly transformed, soft pastel walls, a cradle by the window, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers. She poured her love into every detail, convinced that this child would complete their family and draw her husband closer to her again. Her journal filled with letters to the baby, words filled with tenderness and hope, painting a future she believed was certain. Her joy was pure, the kind that shines through even the hardest days. She walked around with a glow, her smile brighter, her laughter softer yet deeper. She dreamed of family dinners, of her husband holding their child, of a home where love would only grow stronger. To her, motherhood was a gift, and she embraced it fully, even when her husband seemed distant. She told herself it was normal, that men sometimes grew nervous before fatherhood, that once the baby arrived, everything would fall into place. But while she was building dreams, he was drifting further away. He came home late, distracted, his eyes always somewhere else. When she spoke of the baby's first kicks, he smiled faintly but without the warmth she craved. His detachment was sharp enough to wound her, but she carried her faith like armor, believing in the goodness of his heart, trusting that love would return. She thought her joy would eventually pull him back, as if her happiness alone could shield their marriage from the shadows she could not see. The contrast was heartbreaking. She spent her nights planning lullabies, imagining tiny footsteps, while he spent his nights tangled in thoughts of another woman and a painting that had ensnared his soul. She was weaving a future made of love, while he was unraveling it thread by thread. And still, she never stopped believing that he was hers, that their marriage was unshakable, that the man she loved would stand beside her when their child came into the world. She never once imagined that the life she was nurturing so carefully would become the very thing that made her most vulnerable to betrayal. The night of the murder began like so many others, quiet on the outside but storming within the walls of their home. She had set the table with care, her favorite dishes, hoping to draw him into conversation, hoping to feel close to him again. Her belly was heavy now, her movements slower, yet her heart was still light with expectation. She waited for him with the patience of a woman who believed love could heal anything. When he finally came home, his expression was hard, his eyes distant. She greeted him with a tired smile, but it slid off his coldness like rain against glass. The tension between them had grown unbearable. She tried to speak, her voice soft, asking him why he seemed so far away, if he still loved her, if he was ready for the baby. Her questions were laced with fear, but she hid it behind her smile. He snapped back, his tone sharp, accusing her of clinging too much, of suffocating him with expectations. She looked at him with wide, hurt eyes, her hand protectively resting on her belly, as if shielding the child from his words. She begged him not to drift away, told him they could fix whatever was wrong, that she and the baby needed him. But his heart had already been poisoned. The lover's words echoed in his mind. If she's gone, we can finally be together. The painting's dark allure pulsed in his memory, urging him on, blurring reason until he could no longer tell right from wrong. His mind twisted her pleas into chains, her love into a prison, her unborn child into a barrier standing between him and the life he thought he wanted. His breaking point came suddenly. Her tears, her desperation, her fragile hope, all of it collided with his rage. In a moment of madness, he lunged. His hands wrapped around her neck, his grip fueled by obsession and fury. She gasped, struggled, clawed at his arms, her eyes wide with disbelief. She tried to cry out his name, tried to remind him of the love they once shared, but the sound was trapped in her throat. The life inside her, so full of promise, had no chance to escape the violence consuming the room. The silence afterward was deafening. Her body went limp in his arms, her head tilted lifelessly, her hands still cradling her belly even in death. He let her fall gently, almost tenderly, as though he could undo what he had done by laying her down softly. For a fleeting second, a sick rush of victory surged through him. He believed he had done it for love, that the sacrifice was proof of his devotion to the woman who had bewitched him with her art. He thought he had chosen passion over duty, desire over restraint. But in that silence, something else began to creep in. The house no longer felt like a home. The nursery down the hall was unbearably still, the cradle waiting for a baby who would never come. The shadows stretched longer, pressing against him, and though he did not admit it yet, regret had already begun to stir within his chest. He carried the weight of his crime to her, expecting admiration, expecting to be embraced as a man who had proven his love in the most extreme way possible. His heart pounded with a twisted sense of pride as he revealed what he had done, his voice trembling not with guilt but with anticipation of her approval. He told her that his wife was gone, that nothing stood in their way now, that they could finally be together as she had always demanded. But the lover's reaction was nothing like he imagined. Her eyes widened, not with passion, but with horror. She stepped back as though recoiling from something vile. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice sharp and cold. He tried to explain, tried to tell her that it was for them, that he had sacrificed everything so their love could be free. Yet the more he spoke, the more her face hardened, her beauty turning cruel. She had wanted his devotion, yes, but not like this. Her taunts and manipulations had been words, meant to test him, to thrill her with the idea of power. She had never truly expected him to act on them. Now, faced with the reality of his monstrous act, she saw not a lover but a murderer. To her, he was no longer the charming, ambitious man she once played with, but a man stained forever with blood. Without another word, she turned from him. The painting that once bound them together now seemed cursed, mocking him from the shadows. She left him standing there, abandoned, broken, and alone, carrying the unbearable truth that he had destroyed everything for a woman who never truly loved him. What he thought was devotion was nothing but madness, and now there was no one left to share in it. The house became unbearable in the days that followed. Each room echoed with silence, heavy and suffocating, as if the walls themselves mourned what had been lost. He walked through the halls aimlessly, his footsteps hollow, his eyes drifting to the nursery he and his wife had once prepared with such hope. The pastel walls, the cradle by the window, the tiny folded clothes, all of it stood waiting for a child who would never arrive. The emptiness of that room gnawed at him, filling his chest with a sorrow he tried to push away but could not escape. At night, the silence grew louder. He would lie awake, staring into the darkness, and hear her laughter as if it were still alive in the house. He would turn, expecting to see her beside him, only to be met with the cold, empty sheets. Sometimes he swore he heard soft footsteps down the hall, as if the baby had somehow been born in spirit, wandering the house in search of a mother. Shadows stretched across the walls, and in them, he saw her eyes, accusing, tearful, unyielding. The painting, once the object of his obsession, now seemed to mock him. He could not look at it without feeling her presence behind him, without remembering the moment her life slipped away under his hands. Its dark colors twisted in his mind, no longer symbols of passion but of damnation. It had become a curse, a constant reminder that he had traded love for emptiness, devotion for destruction. He began to see her everywhere. In the kitchen, smiling as she prepared tea. In the nursery, humming softly to the child she carried. In the garden, her hands brushing against flowers she had once tended with care. Each vision ended the same way, with her face turning pale, her eyes wide with terror, her hands clutching her belly as she begged him with her final breath. The images haunted him until he could no longer tell what was real and what was a figment of his fractured mind. The weight of her absence crushed him. What once had been a home now felt like a tomb, each object a relic of the life he had destroyed. The air itself seemed heavy with grief, pressing down on him until breathing became difficult. He had thought he was choosing freedom, choosing love, but what he had chosen was a prison of his own making. And in that prison, the only company he had was the ghost of the woman who had once trusted him with everything. Regret seeped into him like poison, slow at first, then overwhelming. In the stillness of the nights, he finally began to understand what he had done. Not just to her, but to himself, to the life they had built, and to the child who would never open its eyes. He thought of her smile, the way she looked at him with unshakable trust, the softness of her voice when she spoke of the future. Now those memories cut into him like knives, reminders of the love he had thrown away for an illusion. He wandered through the house clutching photo albums, his trembling hands tracing the outlines of her face in every picture. Their wedding day, their trips, the small candid moments when she laughed without realizing he was watching. Each photograph mocked him, a reminder that he had once held the very thing he now longed for but could never have again. The nursery door remained closed most days, but when he forced himself to enter, the sight of the untouched cradle brought him to his knees. He would kneel beside it, sobbing, whispering apologies to the child he had killed before it even had a chance to live. Sleep abandoned him. When he did manage to drift into dreams, he woke with a start, drenched in sweat, her voice echoing in his ears. She called his name, sometimes in love, sometimes in terror, always dragging him back to the night he wished he could undo. He began to fear the dark, but the light was no comfort either. No matter where he turned, regret followed, clinging to him like a shadow. The lover was gone, her promises revealed as lies, her affection as fleeting as smoke. The painting, once his prize, had lost all meaning. It hung in the corner like a curse, its colors dull and lifeless, unable to satisfy the hunger that had driven him to madness. He realized too late that what he had destroyed was irreplaceable. His wife had been his true love, his anchor, his family. And now, he had nothing. His downfall was not dramatic, not loud, it was the quiet collapse of a man consumed by the weight of his own choices. In the end, there was no escape from what he had done. The walls of the house, once filled with laughter and gentle conversations, now pressed in on him like a cage. Everywhere he turned, he was confronted by memories, the warmth of her smile, the sound of her voice, the delicate touch of her hand. They returned not to comfort him, but to remind him of the life he had destroyed with his own hands. He had killed the woman who trusted him the most, and in doing so, he had killed every dream they had ever shared. What he thought was love had been nothing more than lust and greed dressed in pretty lies. The lover who had pulled him into the shadows was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her laughter and the hollow shell of a man who had given everything for nothing. The painting, once his obsession, was now meaningless, a silent witness to his madness, a cruel symbol of his downfall. No matter how long he stared at it, it offered no comfort, only the reminder that he had traded love for emptiness. His punishment was not prison walls or judgment from others. It was the relentless weight of regret, a sentence that would follow him every waking moment. He was haunted not just by her absence but by the certainty that he had chosen his own ruin. The memory of her, glowing with life and carrying their child, would haunt him forever. Every shadow in the house, every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind reminded him of her. And so, his story ended not with triumph, not with love, but with regret that gnawed at his soul. For what he killed for was never love, it was nothing more than a curse he brought upon himself.